Hello and good afternoon to everyone. We just want to welcome all of our system leaders. I know we have cabinet members here. We also have superintendents and chief innovation officers. We also have strategic advisors here with us. No matter what role you play in superintendents, no matter what role you play, we want to welcome you to the Manor Independent School District. I'm committed to equity. Now what? Using your SGS roadmap as your equity agenda. We're so excited to have all of you here with us, and our work today really is about the journey of Manor ISD and how we are using our SGS framework to elevate our equity platform. So at this time, I'd just like to again thank everyone for coming. We're so excited for you to be a part of the conversation. And now I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Taja Gross. I'm the newly appointed Chief Equitable Innovation Officer for Manor Independent School District. I'm brand new to this role, but I'm so excited to be a part of the System of Great Schools work. And I will turn it over at this time to Amanda and Margot to introduce themselves as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I am a consultant and working with Education First and excited to be providing support to Manor and the wonderful work they're doing. And I have a background of being a former chief schools officer here in New Orleans. And I'll kick it over to Margot.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. I'm Margot Rowan. I'm the principal consultant overseeing the innovative systems in schools focus area at Education First, and also have the pleasure of working with Amanda and Emily and many others in support of Manor ISD as their executive advisor. Formerly also supported Fort Worth and Richardson as an executive advisor and technical provider, and also support Lubbock as a technical provider. So excited to see this work from a lot of different angles, and I know central to everybody in terms of part of why they come to this work and what brings them to these important conversations about it is issues of equity and wanting to create more equitable options for every student. So we're excited to center that today. With that in mind, quickly share the objectives and agenda for the day before we dive into the work. So this is first and foremost a spotlight of Manor ISD in getting to know a little bit more about how they're approaching issues of equity and thinking about that within their new equity framework, as well as some of the lessons that they've learned along the way. So our objectives for the time are to understand how the work of SGS can intentionally create more equitable systems, understand the current equity journey of Manor ISD, and make sure that we have some time to review and identify action items related to equity tools and resources. So to concretely show you some examples of what that could look like and let you spend some time thinking about what you could be doing or what you might be doing in your district. With that said, our agenda. So we're going to talk about equity and SGS. Again, it's one of those things where we're just trying to make the intangible tangible. We know that equity brings us to the work, but we don't necessarily say it all the time. And so want to really be very clear and concrete about what that means and where it fits in. And then we'll spend the bulk of our time today talking with Manor and hearing from Manor about their approach here, as well as reflecting and looking at resources. So hopefully that sounds good to you. With that, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Amanda.
Yes, thanks, Margot. So as a former classroom teacher, I love making sure that we're starting off with some common definitions and common language. So we would love for you all to utilize the chat and drop in just how do you define equity, either with your organization, you personally, or if there's a word that comes to mind when you think of equity. Please go ahead and drop it in the chat. So we have every child. Thank you, Michelle. Differentiation based on needs. Great. We'll take maybe one more. And also, Margot dropped a note catcher for you all. If you don't want to share in the chat, that's totally fine, but would love for you all to feel like you can take some notes as we go forward. So I love these: differentiation based on needs, as well as every child. And then we also have access and opportunity for all learners and personalized for all students. Love it. And I'm loving how we have students really centered in this definition. So on our next slide, we just have some equity definitions, and these don't have to be the definitions that you use, but one thing that we've seen specifically in the last year is it's great that everyone's acknowledging that equity and making sure that we're thinking about all students important, but oftentimes equity now is turning into another buzzword that we love in education. And so it's really important for you all within your organizations to make sure you have a working definition that agreed upon. Here are two that we wanted to share with you. One from the National Equity Project, which states that educational equity means that every child receives what they need to develop their full academic and social potential. And I think that a lot of the things that you all are saying, talking about access and personalization and all children and every student, really aligns to that. And then the Annie C. Casey Foundation defines equity in general as it involves trying to understand and give people what they need to enjoy full and healthy lives. And so, we wanted to start you off with these definitions. These are great ones to use. Again, it's great to have within your organization, but really wanted to ground that. And also, as Margot said, really thinking about how we're using SGS and different levers within SGS to ensure that we're giving students what they need to develop their full academic potential and ensuring that they're having and enjoying full, healthy lives. So I'll turn it over to Margot.
Yeah, so I'm curious to hear more. We will have some time in smaller groups to discuss this as well, because I think that how we see equity as a through line within a system of great school strategy is contextualized and is something that might look somewhat different across different geographies. But embedded within this system-wide strategy is a desire to address issues of equity or inequity by ensuring that students have high quality school options, that students have access to high quality options, and schools are resourced according to student needs. And so when you look at the levers, and I know we spend a lot of time, kind of looking really deeply at the levers and the sub levers and the different components of the work, but when you step back, you really see that there is this through line around equity and ensuring that students have the schools that they want and need, that they're high quality, that they're well resourced and equitably resourced to ensure that every single student is supported and getting the education that they need. So within that, if you look within the levers, we know that the System of Great Schools approach really starts with that right North Star. And within Manor ISD, for example, we've made sure that the equity framework is a part of identifying that North Star and a part of the conversation. So in identifying that first lever and doing the work around the quality seats analysis, it's looking at a more comprehensive view that includes some very specific levers around equity that the district wants to be mindful of and keep a pulse on to ensure that every single school is high quality for every single student. That also shows up in that annual portfolio planning process. So I know Dr. Gross will have plenty of time to kind of talk through how they've approached this, but have really been thinking about in that annual portfolio planning process, not just which schools need a school action, but also how do we really drive issues of equity across the district. So since day one, when Dr. Gross hit the ground in December, there's been conversations about, even just going beyond, like, yes, we have a lot of school choice within our district, but does everybody really have access if there's issues around transportation, and being very intentional about probing on that through the annual portfolio planning process. Taking bold action to create and expand great options. She'll talk specifically about a school action that they've chosen to do this year and how they've really thought about centering community wants and needs within that. And then empowering families through school choice and access supports, which is an area that they've done a lot of work in and are continuing to really interrogate to ensure that what they want to have in terms of choice and access is realized through their policies and practices. So with that, curious to have you spend some time and really hear about how you're currently thinking about SGS as a way to advance equity in your schools. So as I dropped earlier, there's a notes catcher if you want to have some independent time to reflect, or you can also just talk off the cuff. We're going to actually put you into small groups. So there'll be a little breakout room here that has some time for you to talk about this question. Again, the questions are in the notes catcher, so you can look back to them there once you get into that group. I do hear there's a logistical thing to note, which is that you might need to rejoin the audio when you're in your breakout room. So just want to note that if that's an issue for you, that might be why. We got word from the logistical ninjas behind the scenes. But really want to ensure that you guys have a chance to articulate what this looks like in your work for you right now, as well as potentially opportunities you see to advance that. So sit tight. You're going to whisk off to one of the rooms, and we'll take about 10 minutes in our breakout room for you to have some time to both reflect and talk amongst each other. All right. As folks are coming back, anyone, if there's anything that really stuck out to you from your conversation, knowing that as I popped in, people were having very different conversations about very different things and sat in lots of different positions and roles, please feel free to drop them in your chat as you kind of come back and reflect on the conversation that we've started to have as we shift to thinking about how Manor ISD has approached this work. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Gross.
I just want to thank everyone. I had such an amazing conversation in my breakout group. And now we just want to spotlight just some of the work that Manor ISD is doing, and particularly how we are leveraging the System of Great Schools work to really elevate our equity work here at Manor ISD. So part of the work truly is grounded in our mission statement. And as you can see, those key words that are in our mission statement is really around social, emotional, and academic development, and really ensuring that every scholar, every student receives equitable access to these innovative opportunities. And we'll talk a little more about that. But the way we see this equity work happening in Manor ISD is how we are really connecting three key pieces of work that we see as pivotal and essential to how we begin to move our System of Great Schools work, how we elevate our equity framework and platform, and really how are we driving this whole annual portfolio planning process around ensuring that all students are receiving equitable access to schools of choice. And so as we begin to look at that, we really are committed first and foremost to ensuring that all of our scholars have a number of options. And so options may look different in my district versus your district, but it is really truly a commitment to getting a true understanding of what choice can be. You know, how are we empowering families around choice, and how are we deciding the best options, and how are we giving students voice around the options that are best for them. And I'll talk more about how we got into the quality seats analysis process. And so for us, it looks like, you know, new tech schools, it looks like early college schools, interbaccalaureate schools. It may look different for you, but this is just where our starting point has been with respect to choice. Being a district of innovation, as many of you may or may not know, and I believe when I spoke with Nikki earlier in our breakout group, she's also a district of innovation, but really just leveraging this whole work around the district of innovation. And what does it look like when we start looking at what are some of the flexibilities that we know we need and must have to do the kind of work? So that may look like calendars, flexibility in schedules. We also talked about innovative curriculum, designing performance-based evaluation systems that are really holding our leaders highly accountable for the school actions that we select. So there are many ways that we may, again, look at the District of Innovation work, but this is just really a key driver around how we're elevating our equity work in our district. And the third piece, of course, is our System of Great Schools work. So, you know, how are we really being intentional about using the quality seats analysis process as a key lever and driver to then get into the annual portfolio planning process? And then how do we begin to use all of this information, because we have so much data, we have so much information, but how are we really using it to be strategic and aligned with the correct school actions that we want to take? So this is just at a high level who we are and how we see this work elevating our equity framework and platform. So just a little bit about the demographics here at Manor ISD. We have approximately 9,500 students, a little over. As you can see, 20% of those students are African American. We have a high Hispanic population, so we have just about over 65% of our students who are Hispanic. And of course, we have a small distribution everywhere else you can see. And what's key here is that when we begin to look at race and ethnicity, it's really key as we start talking more about the quality seats analysis and we get into the annual portfolio planning process. This is where demographics are key because we really want to take a step back to kind of have these conversations around what race and ethnicity groups are getting access to what and how are we truly showing a commitment to ensuring that everyone is receiving the same equitable opportunities and access to all the programs of choice that we offer. And so this is really a great part of who we are and how we're having conversations and really providing our students voice. Just a little bit about our parents and our demographics of our homes. Of course, you can see here, educational attainment pretty much is pretty much equitable across the board with the respect of maybe 5% here for high school graduates and another 5% increase for others who have college or associate's degree. We're really hitting that 20% or more mark in every aspect of educational attainment. So again, how are we allowing for every parent's desires, wants, and needs? How are we providing a seat at the table for every parent, every scholar who has a choice, right? They have a choice for what they feel is valuable and what they feel is important to them. How are we providing a seat at the table for every last one of our families and scholars? And then how are we using this information to empower our families around deciding the best choices for their particular scholar? Here at Manor ISD, this is the house that we live in, and our slogan is my future, my choice, scholars first. And so when we started thinking about this whole aspect of equitable opportunities and expanding school choice, this is really a part of how we began that conversation. So we've had a lot of transition around Manor ISD, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about what that looked like. So, of course, I'm a newly appointed Chief Equitable Innovation Officer. I came to Manor ISD in the middle of a pandemic, and I think I landed in Manor ISD December the 1st. And so, as you can imagine, there were a number of issues across the country that were impacting our scholars and really gaining an understanding of how we were going to do education differently in a way that we hadn't done it before, and also make sure that we were making the right plans to make sure that our students receive equitable access to what they needed. And so as a part of that, we have a new leadership team under the direction of Dr. Andre Spencer, who is our current superintendent. We also have a newly appointed Chief Academic Officer. In addition to that, we also have a couple of other new appointments, a new Chief Financial Officer, a new Human Capital Officer. So again, just coming together as a new team, establishing new priorities and really letting the system of great schools work guide us and lead us around what this work really looks like and how we can really use our equity platform to elevate the conversations that we know we needed to have around making sure that our scholars had equitable access to the opportunities that they need. As a new Chief Equity and Innovation Officer, as many of you may call it, I think one of the key pieces of understanding where my priorities would be was around the reorganization. So part of the reorganization work that I know the Education First team has just really helped me to think through intentionally in a new way, has really just been a part of how are we, again, aligning resources, supports, how are we leveraging many of the key levers that we talk about in this system of great schools work, and how are we really, really, really going to be intentional about the strategies, the priorities. What does all this work really look like? We talk about equity, but what does all this work look like, and how do we provide this through line? So we have this through line with the strategic plan, which is exciting and underway, which we're launching the beginning of this year, which will take us to 2026. Looking at our North Star. So again, that work around deciding what is that North Star. So part of the work that we really had to do was really understanding and really facing the hard reality that 40% of our students were receiving equitable access to, high quality A and B rated campuses. And what does that mean for the other marginalized groups of students who just did not have access to high quality A and B rated schools? And then what was that path, or what was that road, or how, what that North Star look like? And so we finally landed at 86.6% of our students by 2026 would have equitable access to high quality A and B rated campuses. And so again, we're working through many of these pieces that come together, but just gaining an understanding of where do we start the SGS work. And so I just want to commend all of you who are here right now. I know many of you may be in your early phases, but I just want to encourage you that this is some of the most rewarding work, the most inspiring work. This has really become a part of my life cause, and I guarantee you that as we begin to talk a little bit about the SGS roadmap and the equity priorities and how these pieces are working together, I know that there will be a smooth marriage between the work that you're doing for a system of great schools, whatever your equity initiative may be. And so you may not have an equity framework right now, or you may have just newly adopted one, as we have in Manor ISD, which we'll be sharing with you a little later on in the presentation, but just really giving you an opportunity just maybe to look at some initiatives. Maybe you're not quite at the place of an equity framework. You're just doing some equity initiatives that will eventually land into a framework. This work that we do around the system of great schools, this work will lead you and guide you around how you can easily align your equity work. So as we shared before, the system of great school strategy is really, for Manor ISD, it was really a high level, district level problem of practice, or a way for us to really solve our approach to how we were going to be intentional about ensuring that every scholar had access to a high quality, best fit school. And so part of that was really, really like at a high level, seeking and understanding around the community needs, some of the information and the data that we have regarding school performance, and then how does all this really come together to really talk about this annual portfolio plan. And for us, the annual portfolio plan is really where we really legitimize for the community how we make these decisions, right? What's needed, that's what we present this compelling conversation to our community about expanding and why, and replacing, and what works and what doesn't work. And so as a part of that, there was a lot of systemic thinking. And what I can say is the systemic thinking is really what I call the quality seats analysis process. And so when you start really working through the quality seats analysis process, that's really your systematic thinking. It's the systematic approach that you do, year in, year out, quarterly, monthly. Those conversations get more and more granulated. But what I can say is it's where you get this open pursuit of just trying to get an understanding. It's a relentless process of just trying to get an understanding. It's several iterations. It's not a one-off or two-off, and let's put it on the shelf, but it's really truly a high-quality reiteration of the work. And Manor ISD, and again, this quality seats analysis process will kind of look a little differently, and we'll talk about that just to see what you're thinking and how you're envisioning that process looking in your district. But the idea is for us to really think about how are we bringing this quality seats analysis process to life. And so from Manor ISD, I'm just going to paint for you at a high level what that process looked like. So when we started the quality seats analysis process, it was really meetings with cabinet leaders, really just to get cabinet a clear understanding of the system of grade schools work, and particularly how this quality seats analysis process, if it's done the right way, it's really setting the table for these strategic school actions. And so we had to approach it in a deliberate way. We had to approach it in an intentional way. We had to approach it by asking the right questions. And we had to be willing to be vulnerable in this process. So yes, there were gaps in data. There were unknowns that we didn't know. Yes, there were opportunities for data that we knew, but we didn't really know how it was going to play into deciding a particular key strategic action. That's okay. But the idea is we had to develop it, we had to own it, and we had to make it our own. And so this is what the process looked like. We looked at these big buckets. We knew that academic quality was important to us. And so as a part of our quality seats analysis process, we looked at academic quality. And so again, we looked at performance scores, we looked at state ratings from TEA, and we looked at ethnicities and groups that were in A, B, C, D, and F rated campuses. So again, we really dissected this information. We looked at the schools that were targeted versus schools that needed additional support. And so we really dug deep on just really trying to get a clear picture of what academic quality looked like and proficiency and what that looked like for our students. We went through school talent. So school talent was another component of the quality seats analysis process. So again, your process may look a little differently, but we were really intentional about what are all the key buckets of information that we just really need to know more about. And so as a part of that conversation, principal effectiveness data was an important part. Educator effectiveness data was an important part of this. You know, we talked a lot about tenure at campuses. We had a lot of conversation about attendance. We talked about the percentage of highly qualified teachers. So again, the process may unfold differently for you. We talked about, choice. And so we had, and again, enrollment and choice was very important to us. We have a very rapidly growing community, and we knew that as our community continued to grow, we knew that there was going to be a need for us to kind of look at space utilization and how we were using space. We had to have an honest conversation again about under-enrolled and over-enrolled schools. We had to really look at the admissions and the programmatic data in the process. So what schools were using the lottery, what schools were not, how are students gaining access to what? We had to really have a deep conversation about models and what the model was intended for. Do we have a neighborhood high school approach? Do we have a choice process? What was our approach? And we really had to look at charter draw. And so again, we began to look at feeder patterns, charter draw, charter proximity, because again, we really had to take a close and honest look at where we were around all of these strategic supports that we really wanted to really understand what we were doing around key school actions. We talked about school talent, community input and partnership was a really good component. So again, we had a lot of survey data with respect to principal leaders, scholars, and parents, and how did all this community input and partnership data, how did all this come together? We even had to look at school environment. So we know that we were in the era of pandemic and the numbers were stagnant, but we really need to go back and look at 2019 and 2018 to just really begin to get a clear picture of, what were we doing around truancy, attendance, dropout, and all these other key levers that are really a part of how we decide where are the best opportunities for us to make the right decisions for our scholars. So again, as we kind of like surface through, can we go back one?
Yep.
Thank
and then
you.
we just wanted to definitely going back one, Dr. Gross, because I think this leads up really well to thinking about the strategies which led to you all creating this equity framework that aligns so well.
Yep. And so I just think, so at the end of the process, and again, it was community input, community partnership, There were a couple other areas I really would like to share, but I know for the sake of just understanding that all this information came together for us to just really allow these data points to really surface for us to determine what our potential priorities would be. And so here they are, our priorities right here. We knew that we need to have a new strategic plan. We knew that we had to provide the through line between the strategic plan, the work we were doing around the District of Innovation, and the equity framework. Here's also another discovery. We realized that our middle schools, with the exception of one school being C rated, we realized that the other schools, one was D rated and one was F rated. So again, we knew that there was a sense of urgency based upon the data that surfaced from the quality seats analysis process. We knew we had to expand equitable access to choice and quality options.
Yeah, and thinking about yeah.
But at the same time,
all those things. Yeah, keep going, Dr. Gross.
But at the same time, we knew that we had to improve our C-rated campuses, and we had to do something to get C-rated campuses to be A or B rated. So that was a big piece. And then moving to scholar-based budgeting and talent pipelines. How are we recruiting and retaining our best teachers and educators to lead this work? Our next piece was to say, hey, now that we have the findings and we've surfaced all of this work around the known and the unknown. So the data surfaced in a way that there were some things that were just obvious to us given where the data was. And then there were just some clear unknowns. But how do we package all this? How do we use this equity framework as our opportunity to leverage the system of great schools work? And so after many conversations and many sessions of feedback from cabinet leaders, district leaders, and then as a part of conversations that we had as a part of the strategic planning process, there was an equity and innovation strand as a part of the strategic planning process. And so again, conversations over and over again about what mattered to us as a part of the Manor ISD community. Here is our start to our equity framework. And I say start because this is really this process, this equity work, as Commissioner Morav said earlier, this is really not just, a destination. This is just something that we continue to strive to work through. And so in this equity framework, you'll see that it's rooted in social justice. So again, this is the conversation about how do we address the fact that, yes, equity is about making sure that students are receiving what they need and they're receiving all of what they need. But what about the things that are outside of scholars' control, right? And these are barriers, systemic barriers, and things that are in their way that are preventing them from getting equitable access to what they need. So it was just really important for us to talk through the lens of social justice, looking at the fact that while some of our scholars are receiving access to high quality A and B rated schools, the reality of it is it's creating opportunity gaps for others who don't get access to it. So we really need to be intentional about how we were going to address and respond to racial disparities head on. And what were we going to do about implicit biases, systemic barriers, and the diversity and inclusion work that we know that we just have really just started in the infancy phases. What does that really look like? And in the center, you'll see that this is a cyclical process. We're forever learning, growing, understanding, and professional learning and continuous school improvement should continue to inform where we are, which is the outer circle. So again, this is our commitment. This is front facing to the community. This is front facing to our scholars, our parents, our community partners. This is who we are and what we're about as it relates to the equity framework. And so personalized learning, understanding scholar-based budgeting, and transforming our budgeting system to one that is clearly personalized to the needs of students on campuses. The work around restorative justice, community engagement, and equitable school choice. And so that really includes the lottery system and how we are being more intentional about policies, procedures, and how they are presenting barriers for students and them getting access to these high quality A and B rated schools. And then, what are we doing? What is our commitment around recruitment and retention and high quality academics when we build, when we decide these strategic school actions? That's great. But what is the academics that we're putting in these particular schools to ensure that they're high quality, high rated?
And I think, Dr. Gross, this is, leads us into this next slide, which really highlights how you all use this equity framework and commitment to SGS and thinking about some of the school actions. So your key priorities in redesigning Manor Middle based on performance, but also based on thinking about the students that go there and coming from certain marginalized communities, as well as your decision to keep 6th grade at a high performing elementary school. So knowing that the school that the students are currently at is higher performing, thinking about equity and access challenges and the different things you're trying to do, this strategic decision you all made to keep students at the school as opposed to sending them to a school that's much lower performing. So we are going to hold for Q&A. We'll stay on for Q&A. Before we get to Q&A, though, we wanted to share some resources with you all. So Margot shared with you all a link in our chat, and it also should be on the platform, which is a note taker. But in the note taker, there's some opportunities to reflect. There's some also opportunities using a table that Dr. Gross actually has used in thinking about what lever for SGS you're using, what are some key initiatives, and also making sure you're thinking about how is this supporting your equity initiatives, similar to the thought process they used. We also shared a resource with you from the National Equity Project and thinking about how do you identify an equity challenge, and always thinking about how you're addressing things above and below the green line. So thinking about the structures, pattern, and process that could be potentially impacting equity. And we know that structures, pattern, and processes are things that we utilize throughout all of our SGS strategies, but also thinking about below the green line, which gets into relationships and the relationships you have with the community, relationships the community has with their schools, individuals in there, which gets into the identity and the identity of those of you who lead, as well as those of you who serve, and what potential opportunities or challenges that could provide when you're thinking about advancing equity. And then information. Oftentimes when we think about challenges, people don't always have access to the correct information. They may not understand your choice process. They may not understand enrollment. They may not understand school decisions, or may not be able to read the information in the way it's currently presented. So also thinking about how we're getting information to people. And so we've also included that on our platform as a resource. So we have really enjoyed having everyone here today. We're excited to have Dr. Gross share, as some of you all put in the chat. They have done incredible work in the middle of a pandemic and in the middle of some big change for their district, but really have tried to think about honoring the work of the system of great schools, but as you saw, building an equity framework that is directly aligned to the different components to ensure that when they're making decisions, when they're making school action decisions and innovation, decisions about how they're advancing equity and innovation, it is all working together, and it's not SGS work over here, strategic plan over here, and equity framework over there. They're all working together. So we thank Dr. Gross, who, as we always says, wears a bunch of different hats, for sharing this with you all. And we'll stay on for the last few minutes for anybody who has any questions.
I'll lift up a question that was put in the chat for Dr. Gross, wondering about how your AB rated campuses inform your analysis and decision making, especially around issues of equity.
So I believe, so when we look at, let's just say from, a district level, how we're assessing this. So again, I think really getting a clear understanding of all of those key pieces of data that you really, that's important to your quality seats analysis process. Again, for us as a district and organization, we had to make that decision about what was important, and upon conversations, it just became academic quality, school talent, enrollment and choice, community input, school environment and culture, district resource allocation, and academic partnerships. And so, as a district, as an organization, we had to be committed to just getting a clear understanding of where we wanted to focus. And again, systems. So, that's the second part. That's the equity audit process. So, again, as we continue to move this work forward, just think about the equity audit process and some of the other audits that you may want to conduct as a part of getting an understanding of the systems and how your systems are working together and where the gaps are as well as the opportunities. And then policy. So policy is established by boards. And so again, as you begin to work through policy work and program work, it's important just to ensure that as you begin to unfold many of these things, just really look for the clear alignment between board policy and your actual district guidance documents so that you can begin to open those conversations about where those gaps are between policy and guidance documents so that you can really get an understanding of where you need to go next with policy development.
And I see a hand raised. Go ahead and jump on in.
Hi, thank you. This is Darrington Ramsey. I'm the Executive Director of School Support for Ector County. I'm wondering, well, let me say, Dr. Gross and your team, thank you for sharing. I really appreciate the intentional work that you all are doing. And I'm wondering, sort of drawing on some of the comments that the commissioner made today, it sounds like you all have a lot of protocols and processes that you are engaging in, following some of the resources and supports that's being provided by TEA. But I'm wondering that below the green line work of how are you situating or thinking about that work and those processes and those protocols being situated within a given culture that potentially has contributed to those campuses that aren't necessarily in the place that we want them to be, and therefore needing to sort of build both professional and technical capacity, but also sort of the social, emotional, and cultural aspects of their understanding, knowledge, and skill, the teachers, the community, the students, the principals, even the district level, cabinet level folks. How are you thinking about doing that cultural work?
Thank you so much for that question. To be honest with you, it has been an above the line and below the line, right? So some days I'm very much above the line, some days I'm very much below the line. I think when we look at the strategic plan as our guidepost and really being clear and intentional about what this work looks like, one thing I will say is that there's some work that happens side by side. And so as a part of the creation of the equity framework, it really gave us the space to have the conversations because all of the conversations are in the framework around the equity platform that you saw here on today. The other piece is we know that with respect to processes, we know that it's really a rollout. And so we really look at, what are we planning for school leaders? What are we planning for teachers? What are we planning for scholars? What are we planning for our business and community partners? And the equity framework was just the first part of the conversation. What I will say is the next layer of work that we have to do in all transparency is around the introduction to racial equity. What does that look like? So we really need to begin and build that work out. What does it look like when we talk about the trainings for implicit biases? What does that work look like when we talk about diversity and inclusion and what that looks like in schools and classrooms and what students have access to what? And so those are the conversations that we're having now as we begin to plan our SGS work for this next year and really bring our equity framework side by side. Those are many of the things that we're planning. Even if you look at the equity framework, you'll see that we have information in there about the talent pipeline. So again, if we just use that for an example, how are we thinking about onboarding processes and procedures and how are we really getting at that recruitment and retention? And so each one of those components on the outer part of that circle, each one of them we're thinking
All right,
Is it
looks like it's
on your
frozen.
end? Oh, yeah, I was just wondering.
If it's them or all of us. It looks like it's all of us, but we're also right at time. So Amanda, I'll kick it back to you to close us out here.
So I'm so sorry because Dr. Gross, we can see, was definitely into it. I just reshared our emails in the chat, though. If you all have any more questions, we'll also upload this presentation to you all to the platform as soon as we're done. And we thank you all again for your time today. We give a lot of shout out and big love to Dr. Gross and the team at Manor ISD. And thank you again. So again, our emails are in the chat. Also, the link to the note catchers in the chat, and we'll upload the presentation to the platform as well as the resource we shared from the National Equity Project. So thanks everyone today, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Well,
And
thank you all for sharing.
sharing.
Have a good afternoon.
Take care.
Bye.